Med Hondo was born in 1936 in what was then colonial Mauritania. He emigrated to France in 1959, and his experiences attempting to make a living and the alienation he felt in this new country were funneled into the 1967 feature Soleil O, aka O Sun. Hondo was able to realise his film on a relatively lower budget, $30,000 according to one source, presumably unadjusted for inflation, and apparently funded via Hondo's work dubbing American films into French. This continued to prove lucrative throughout Hondo's life, as he would eventually voice Ben Kingsley's Gandhi for the French dub, and later on, French viewers of The Lion King may know his voice as Rafiki's. I remember when I first viewed Soleil O, I was utterly floored by it, one of the most fascinating acts of film composition ever realised. The way this picture is able to conjure so much mood and atmosphere of so little resources and with so little evident logistics and technological trickery impresses me immensely. As far as I can see, angles and lighting, as well as tasteful framing and a conscious, coherent drive in the production's purpose, are what elevates this modest production into one of the most striking, articulate, powerful films ever made. This film's plot is autobiographical in nature, as a Mauritanian native, elated at having the opportunity to emigrate to Paris, is subsequently disheartened and disgusted at the treatment he and others of his ethnic heritage are subjected to in France. I remember one snippet of dialogue in the film, expressed by a white character or delivered as a hypothetical quotation of a white character during a hallucinatory sequence, is, paraphrasing, something along the lines of, "Oh, we gave them independence, why do they have to come here?" That right there identifies a very challenging disconnect which the post-war developed world, the former colonial powers, were, and really still are, grappling with, and never at a surface level, always via whispers. Now, the governing bodies of these nations saw fit to open up their labour forces, allowing migrants to assist in the rebuilding or sustenance of the state's economy. To these prospective immigrants, this was a welcome opportunity to build a better life in the developed world, raise a family in a more safe and privileged environment than the nation of their birth might be. However, the actual citizens, the initial citizens of these developed nations proved, and still can prove, potentially hostile to those immigrants, particularly against those who were perceived as more removed from their cultural or ethnic heritage. The harsh schizoid contradiction that an economic migrant faces then, a nation welcomes them to work for their economic machine, but at the same time apparently seems to resent their presence. So what do they want from me? It reminded me of Franz Kafka, or at least some of the filmic renditions of Kafka's literature. This is especially when I consider this idea that Kafka's work was fundamentally concerned with his Jewish identity, feeling like an inevitable other in his supposed home. Actually, watching Soleil O again now, it struck me as ridiculously relevant to the world of today, when economic migration is more commonplace, more encouraged due to uncertain economic sustenance without it, and controversies over, for instance, continued migration into Europe are some of the most culturally ferocious debates occurring in this present day. Now, obviously, the contemporary migration issue, particularly where Europe is concerned, is extremely complex and multifaceted. I'm not here to offer an explanation of the scenario or claim that Soleil O can or could summarize it either, although it is still very instructive. I brought up that quote earlier, the paraphrased remark about, "Oh, we gave them independence, why do they have to come here?" We don't feel the need that they ought to be oppressed by us, at least not anymore, but we don't want any of them to live amongst us. The concept of the other is entrenched, especially where one's skin colour is concerned. I recall a recording of Michael de Freitas, later known as Michael X, in the recent Adam Curtis documentary miniseries, wherein he claims that, growing up in British-controlled Trinidad and Tobago, he would sing God Save the King every day in his schooling, proudly believing he was a valued citizen of the Empire. Upon his emigration to the UK in 1957, he realised the truth that the British of Britain were not ready or willing to accept him as a British subject. The prospect that one's skin colour would render them a discriminated other in a society, it is soul-destroying. The grievances expressed by both the black and white characters in Soleil O are heavily foreshadowing of contemporary expressions in the context of current immigration, certainly where France appears to be concerned. The migrants just want to live their lives as others do in France, to make a living and accepted without question, just as another contributing French citizen. The traditional French natives instead insist, no, this is not their home, no, they are not French, nor can they ever be. But why do they feel this way? Do they believe that to be French is more than a passport designation? Is to be French an acceptance of values and principles, or a byproduct of one's genetic heritage? All I know is that I felt as though much of the dialogue utilised in this film could have been delivered in a film which had come out in the last 5 or 10 years. It is remarkable, and rather depressing actually, that these issues are still contentious and controversial in the several decades since the completion and release of Soleil O. Those who bemoan any immigration from foreign nations tend to insist that these immigrants will never be truly loyal subjects to their new home, and those who do immigrate insist that they just want a better, safer way of life. Obviously, the real world is a very nuanced place. Yes, maybe some immigrants will not fit in, insist on bringing over cultural values which the new host nation is not compatible with. It could happen. And perhaps most or much expressed hostility toward immigration is really motivated by nothing more than prejudicial racism. In Soleil O, our protagonist wants nothing more than to be a contributing French citizen. The French insist he will never be one, and even his supposed white allies express condescension toward him, vaguely subtly indicate their perceived superiority toward him and his diaspora, and even fetishize him as a functional commodity. I consider Soleil O to be one of the top films of all time, one of the very best discussed on FOTD thus far, one of the most powerful works of art I have ever witnessed.